The MOZA MTQ comes with a nice control layout on the base, finger lifts, and the option to swap the combat grip for an Airbus or Boeing variant. Starting at €219 or $199, this sounds like a tempting option, but is it? Well, kind of. It has a good set of controls, but there is quite a bit going on beneath the hood that you need to be aware of, along with some other characteristics that are not visible in images or videos. I'm Mish, this is the MOZA MTQ, nice to have you here again. I've been flying with it for most of the last week or so. It's a nice little unit with a lot of features, but not without its flaws. Let me give you an overview first. The MOZA MTQ comes in a well-cushioned box together with a bunch of accessories. The plastic base has a small footprint and a really good selection of controls. What you can see here are the contacts for the swappable grips. First impression is quite good, not high-end, but well built. Then we have the right side of the throttle lever with a bunch of heads and a mini stick. On the left there is a scroll encoder and a button. We also get the handles for the air brake and flap levers, along with a cable to chain MOZA devices and a USB cable. And finally, here are the Airbus handles, made from glossy black plastic. Yes, glossy. The same applies to the Boeing handles, which are white and glossy. Both come with their own matching handles for the flap and air brake lever, which is a nice addition. Putting everything together is super straightforward. You just snap on each side of the throttle handle and tighten a screw, at least on paper. In my case, the thread on the left side somehow did not grip the screw. I fixed that later by using a longer one. On the other side, there was no problem. The handles on the flap and brake levers simply snap on or off, which is quite convenient. The finger lifts and detents are pre-installed. While playing around with the throttle after unboxing, some quirks already started to show themselves, but more on that later. Well, that's some serious versatility, I'd say. Swapping out handles is easy, just one screw per side and everything else just snaps on or off. I also don't need to explain that the glossy Airbus and Boeing handles surprised me a bit. It ended up being more cleaning than filming while trying to get good studio shots. MOZA, why? These are called handles because you touch them all the time. They look greasy about 5 seconds after unboxing. Well, let's continue with a closer look at the controls. On the combat grip, we get 2 pushable 4-way heads and a 3-position switch, with one side being momentary. On the front, there's a contactless mini stick and a micro switch button. On the side is a large scroll encoder, and we have a pair of finger lifts. The included detents are for engine cutoff and afterburner. On the back of the handle is a sliding lock to engage dual engine control. On the black TQA, we find 2 tactile buttons, one on each handle, and finger lifts for reverse thrust. On the white TQB, there are also 2 buttons on the handles and 2 Boeing-style reverse levers. They act as buttons, not as dedicated axes. Next to them are 2 more tactile buttons. On the base, there is an analog speed brake axis with an armed and down detent, which also acts as a button. The flap lever sits on another analog axis and has 4 detents in total, which is great for Airbus, but not ideal for Boeing operation. Technically, you can place the lever between the detents, but it's not very comfortable to do so. Then we have 6 RGB lit tactile buttons. They feel good to use and are easy to find in VR. On the side are 4 more buttons, but those feel like membrane switches and are a bit mushy. On the right side of the throttle are 3 2-way switches, one of them shaped like a gear lever. They feel very smooth and are probably the same ones I praised on the MTP throttle. Above them is a 2-way momentary switch, which is great for engine cranking. Next to it are 2 pushable scroll encoders. They feel okay, not very snappy, a bit coarse, but they do the job. And lastly, there is a 5-way rotary switch. It is super snappy and sits tightly on its mount, really nice. Overall, this is a very well thought out mix of controls. Everything is structured conveniently, so you can easily find every input, even when you are blind in VR. Now, let's fly a bit. The main throttle axis is nothing to complain about. It has 65,000 sensor points and works flawlessly. The engine cutoff detent activates 4 different buttons depending on its position, and beyond the afterburner detent sits another pair. Cruise, dogfights, strafing runs and landing all work without issues. The Airbus handle ignores the center detent and instead uses detent rails on each side to lock into several power stages like idle, climb, flex, and toga. So what's the catch? Why is my conclusion that this is a decent throttle, but not a no-brainer if you want a small, versatile throttle for general aviation and combat flying? Well, let's find out. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video so far, it helps more than you think. Now let us go into the less stellar parts. While the basis plastic is quite good for the price, the combat grip shell feels hollow and a bit cheap. It is not very pleasant to touch. It's not as bad with the GA grips. They are okay and feel good, but $45 is still too steep in my opinion. The same goes for the finger lifts. The plastic is soft and bends a bit. They do their job, but that's about it. As you can see, the detent bracket already has some play and bends slightly right off the box when you hit idle. You also can't push through the afterburner detent and instead have to engage the finger lifts again. The lock on the combat grip works well and secures both sides tightly, but the mount underneath is not rigid enough, so there still is some wobble. On top of that, there's noticeable lateral play. This means the two grips tend to scrape against each other when you move them independently in dual engine mode. Before we go into the ergonomics, let us look at the internals. That is where I found something surprising. The internal mechanics are metal, but the throttle lever moves on a plastic gear. That's fine if the plastic quality is good, I can't judge it from the outside. More important is the sensor choice though. MOZA uses mechanical potentiometers, which I find quite odd on a device that costs over €200. Yes, you can use high-quality potentiometers that survive hundreds of thousands of cycles. But with Hall sensors being common even in gamepads now, this decision is hard to understand. Don't get me wrong, the sensors work well right out of the box and I had no issues during testing. The problem is long-term reliability. I asked MOZA for the specs of the potentiometers, but they would not provide them. So the question of wear remains open. And since we're already talking about wear, this leads to another potential issue. The colleagues over at threshold.net, whose review I linked in the description, used the GA grips much more than I did. Over time, the ball that locks the Airbus grip into the detents started to carve a groove into the detent rail. This could cause the detents to lose their function after a year or more of use. Another gripe is the friction control. It adjusts all levers at once except the flaps. If you tighten it to get a properly weighed feel on the main throttle axis, the speed brake becomes too stiff because it's much shorter and has less leverage. The base is also not very heavy, so if you do not bolt it down, it struggles with higher tension settings and can tip over. I assume MOZA grouped everything under one friction mechanism to keep costs down. Still, it would have made more sense to either give the speed brake its own friction adjustment or exclude it from the friction system altogether. There also seem to be firmware issues. The rotary encoders register inputs with noticeable delay and even continue to register inputs after you stop turning them. This should be fixable with an update though. Now let's look at the ergonomics. There isn't much to say about the GA grips. As far as I can tell, they behave like the real thing and do their job well. For deeper insights, check out one of the many great GA channels on YouTube. The combat grip has strengths and weaknesses. All controls on the right side are easy to reach and work well. The heads have a bit of play and likely use nav switches, but they are fine in practice. The scroll encoder is okay, but a bit coarse, and the recesses are too large to use comfortably with the pinky. The mini stick on the front is controlled with the ring finger, which leaves the only front button to the pinky. I would have moved everything slightly inward so the stick could be used with the index finger and the button with the ring finger. I also would have liked to see two front buttons instead of just one. They work very well as left and right wheel brakes if you don't have pedals. I used the push button of the mini stick as a workaround, but that feels more like a band-aid than a real solution. Now, let's take a look at the software. There are several calibration options and you can set the active range of the detents. You can choose whether the speed brake and flap levers operate as buttons, as an axis, or as both at the same time. The RGB lighting also is customizable. There is a static manual mode, device controlled lighting based on lever position as shown here with the flap lever, or telemetry-based lighting using values like the engine RPM. So what's the bottom line? I think the base is the best part of this set. It has an excellent selection of controls. I especially like the engine crank switch, the gear lever, and the 6 tactile buttons. Adding 2 extra axes besides the main throttle and making the grips interchangeable is a great idea. The airliner grips are the better part of the system. The combat grip falls short in comparison. The shell does not feel premium, and the input options are limited. While I think the MOZA MTQ throttle is great, especially with the MLTP panel attached, the MTQ is more of a mixed bag. If the potentiometers hold up, it's a solid option if you regularly switch between GA and combat flying and you care about immersion and authenticity a lot. If you do not do that, then not so much. You can fly any Boeing or Airbus just fine with any dual engine throttle unit. It is neither bad nor outstanding. It feels like a first generation product with good ideas that still need refinement. MOZA can absolutely build on this concept. With contactless sensors, more weight in the base, improved airbus detents, and better materials for the combat grip, this could turn into a seriously well-rounded throttle because the core idea itself is already quite good. For a complete market overview, check out my 50-minute HOTAS roundup. Let me know what you think about the MTQ in the comments below. Thanks for stopping by, fly safe, and see you in the next one.